And policing, now of course major issues on the campaign trail, but what can the president, or Congress for that matter, do about racial and police tension? Joining us now are two men who know. Democratic Congressman of New York's Greg Meeks, he's the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Republican Congressman of Georgia, Doug Collins. Thanks, gentlemen, both of you, for being here, because let's try to get some answers for the viewers today. And I think that you both are in a good position to do this. Congressman Collins, let me start with you, because you're on this House Task Force of Police Community Relations. What is the first thing that you would do to stop the kind of tension and the shootings, frankly, that we've been covering so much of in the past year?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a tragedy, and I think what this police working group is trying to do is come to the discussion points and say, where can we find dialogue? Where can we bridge gaps? What's happening is unacceptable. It's unacceptable in the police community. It's unacceptable in the communities in which they serve. What we're trying to do is begin to facilitate that conversation. I've made this comment many times that what is needed right now is trust, and what is broken right now is trust. So I think one of the things that this police working group is beginning to have that dialogue between the communities and the police and the issues that they're facing to say, how can we have a better communication relationship so when instances like this come up, there is a trust factor that can get us a positive result instead of the tension that we're seeing right now.
Okay, so communication is number one, but let's talk about specifically how Congress can help. Congressman Meeks, what we have heard in the past few days after these shootings, more federal aid for local law enforcement. They need more money. Can that happen from Congress?
Well, I hope. And let me first, I'm chair of the Congressional Black Caucus's Political Action Committee, not the Congressional Black Caucus. Is different organizations, so I want to make sure that's clear. But there are things that we can do. Number one, Doug is part of, and I talked to Cedric Richmond from Louisiana and Hakeem Jeffries from New York, and Chairman, Ranking Member John Conyers. They're working together. That dialogue and conversation is tremendously important. But what we can do, we have the power to do in Congress, is pass legislation. And there are various bills that are already, that have been written, that we need to talk about. We need to have hearings on them and then vote them on the floor. Yep. For example, we have to fund more body cameras, because what we know is that when you have a visual view of what's taking place, it helps transparency, because the issue in a lot of cases is just a matter of transparency. Yes. No one, and so we can do that. We can pass a piece of legislation that will require require the Attorney General to come up with the statistics, clearly showing the makeup of who is being shot and who's not. Sure. We don't even do that. So there's pieces of legislation that's written that we can pass that can make a difference and give people, to relieve the trust factor that's involved here.
So let's talk about that, Congressman Collins. One of the things that we have heard from every person who has come on here in the past few days about these shootings is that there is a need for independent investigators, independent investigations. After one of these police shootings, you can't rely on the police department that's involved to investigate itself. Who's getting in the way of some sort of investigative body that could look into these things?
Well, I think what you're looking at here is again, and Gregory and I have talked about this before, and we were talking about this morning, there's a difference in the federal level, the state, and the local response. And many times the laws on how you deal with, even things such as the videotapes, which I think are very good, and the body cameras do give that perspective. To look at on each state having different standards on how that happens. What we need to look at is how then do we have the independent investigations working with the state and local, and then where there is a need from a federal perspective, and I do believe the Department of Justice is looking into these. I do believe there is a proper federal role there, especially when you're seeing the incidents like we are seeing. So I think this is something that is maybe something as we look forward in our working group, talking with both members of both Democrats and Republicans, say, is there a way that we can look at an investigatory process that is fair to both sides, but that involves the federal? If not, how do we encourage state and local to be more transparent in how they go about this?
Okay, Congressman Meeks, do you think that can happen? A federal body, let's say, that can be the investigative body?
Well, I think the hope is the working group, because it seems as though when you listen to Doug, you talk to Doug, and I've been talking to Cedric and others, that they are in fact, so communication among both parties is tremendously important. That's the first step. And then, so that communication is there. So you would hope that the next step is that we would agree upon, on a bipartisan way, legislation that will go through the hearing process, and then we will have a vote on the floor. And so I have hope that that will happen, but it needs to happen in an expeditious manner so that we can make sure that people have faith in the criminal justice system, which they do not now.
Yeah, Congressman Collins, we also hear everybody say that there has to be better training for police officers. They have to know what to do in a situation like this and not feel as scared as it seems Officer Shelby did in Tulsa. Would you be willing to fund that? Does Congress have the appetite for funding better training for local police officers?
Well, I think right now all things are on the table, and I think there's several issues, not just in the training of officers, and this is something that we need to understand. You just brought this up. When officers are going out and feeling like they're under siege or they're concerned for their own safety, that heightens not only their policing concern on how they view their situations, but then it maybe takes away from the possible de-escalation, other things that they can use. My father was a state trooper for 31 years. I lived in a state trooper's household, a trooper's kid. I know what it's like to see your dad go out to work, and you had those concerns. Would he come home? He had been, in many fights, many other things. But we got to give them, and he has always told me that training is one of the most important things that we can do. I think that's where the federal dollars and programs that we can get to the locals to train them in all aspects, not just the physical aspects, but the mental aspects of a traffic stop, the mental aspects of going to a domestic violence situation. These are issues in which they are put in a position sometimes of no win, but they need to have those tools for de-escalation so that we can have a positive result.
Congressman Meeks, on a brighter note, there is an historic moment in Washington happening this weekend. The National Museum of African American History and Culture opens tomorrow on the National Mall. I know this was years in the making. Tell us the significance.
Oh, let me tell you, it is amazing. I had a chance to do a quick preview. It is an American story, the American story. It's great for all Americans. When you go look at from the beginning of slavery in America to where we are today, all of Americans get to see the progress and the contributions that African Americans made to this great country of ours. It makes you feel with pride, if you're an African American especially, but for all Americans, when you look at the progress that has been made over that time. And all Americans will have a chance on the Federal Mall to come and see this great American story of the contributions of African Americans to this great country of ours. It is absolutely amazing. It is very well done. And I think that for generations yet unborn, people will then get to see the American story and the greatness of it as how it has evolved and continues to evolve in attempting to be a more perfect union.
Obama will be there tomorrow. I look forward to bringing my kids there. Congressman Meeks, Congressman Collins, thanks so much for being here.